and we are going to take up where we left off, and we're going to look at the next component here. And the next component, we're going to get kind of small. So we're going to go here, and we're going to look at the cells. We're going to look at things from a cellular standpoint as we come to understand again ourselves and how we are made and how we function and so on. Of course, we know that the cell is the smallest unit of life that has all of the different necessary components of living organisms, and there are single-celled living organisms, amoeba and so on, little protozoans, and so our body, of course, is made up of cells. Some estimates are around 50 to 100 trillion cells that the body is composed of, depending on the individual and how big they are and so on. And some of the estimates are over 250 different types of cells in the body. And of course, you have certain types of cells in the liver, you have other types of cells in the spleen, you have other types of cells in the brain, you have other types of cells in the lungs, you have other types of cells in the different tissues and the organs, and of course the different types of tissues and the different types of organs are determined by the types of cells that they're made of. And cells, they have, well, many of them have a nucleus where you have your DNA. You've got your endoplasmic reticulum, and some of it is dotted with ribosomes. So you have your rough endoplasmic reticulum, and you have your smooth endoplasmic reticulum, and you've got free-floating ribosomes, and you've got mitochondria, and so on. Of course, I'm not drawing things to proportion, and you have your Golgi apparatus, and so on. And so you have all of these different cellular components. And the cell functions like a factory. It functions like a factory, and of course a factory is going to be there to produce a product. Right? A factory is there to produce a product. And so your cells are also going to produce a product or products depending upon the type of cell that it is. And a cell, when we just consider this simple analogy of a factory, if a factory is going to produce anything, then there are a number of requirements that that factory has in order to produce something. The factory is going to need to, of course, have a structure. And so here in the cell we have the structure. And a factory is going to need to have some workers. And so we have the workers for the factory that's in here, the various different organelles and so on. But if you have a factory that has a structure and has workers, you can't produce anything because you're still missing some vital components. Right? What is one of the things that a factory needs in order to produce a product? Okay. So you need machinery. So in here we've got our machinery, we've got our structure, we've got our workers. Exactly right. You're exactly right. As was mentioned, we need raw materials. Right? So we're going to need raw materials in order to supply the need of the cells. Because remember, the cells, just like you and I, they have these needs. They need oxygen, they need water, they need nutrients, and so on. And so we can throw those in here. They need oxygen, they need water, they need nutrients. What is something that is similar or common between water, oxygen, and nutrients? They are all a certain type of something. What are they? What's that?
Gas?
Okay. Well, not necessarily. I mean, you can turn water into a gas. Nutrients, some of the nutrients, it's hard to turn them into gas. Some of them are metals. Okay, so these are various different needs for the cell. Exactly. They are needs. And I'm fishing, but I'm going to give you the answer. They're all chemicals. Right? These are all chemicals. Right? All the needs that you have from a raw material standpoint is chemicals. Right? So whether it's the various different nutrients like sodium, potassium, chloride, calcium, and so on, or whether it's the oxygen or the water, proteins, fats, carbohydrates, then all of those are different chemicals. And so if your raw materials are chemicals, then what is your product going to be? Chemicals. That's right. So your product is going to be chemicals as well. So these are going to be chemicals too. And so you might have hormones, which are chemicals that are produced by certain cells in the body. You might have cell signaling molecules, which are chemicals. You might have inflammatory molecules like interleukin-1 and interleukin-6 and tumor necrosis factor alpha and other things like that. All of the different cells, depending on the type of cell, will depend on the particular type of product that it makes, but it has to have raw materials in order to make that product. But how many cells of your body need oxygen?
All of them.
All of them do. All right, how many of them need nutrients?
All of them.
All of them. And how many need water?
All of them.
Okay, so where does the oxygen come from? Outside or inside?
Outside.
Outside. So you're going to have to bring it in, right? And so there's an action of bringing in the oxygen, which is?
Breathing.
Breathing. And it has to come in through an organ system. What organ system does it come in through? Through the respiratory system. So you need oxygen. There's an action of breathing, and it comes in through a particular organ system or the respiratory system. And then once it gets into the respiratory system, it has to be able to get to all the rest of the parts of the body. Because your toes need it, your fingers need it, the roots of your hair need it, right? Every different part of your body, they need the chemicals that you take in, the oxygen that you breathed in from the outside environment. So what is the pathway, what's the vehicle that gets the oxygen to all of the parts of the body so that all the cells can have what they need?
Blood vessels, the pathway, and blood, the vehicle.
Okay, that's right. So the blood vessels are the pathway, and the blood is the vehicle. And so your cardiovascular system, of course, is very important. You don't want to try living without it because it won't work very long. And we're told in the Bible that the life is in the blood. Right? And one of the reasons that we can see that is because all of the raw materials that the cells need in order to function are dependent upon the blood. And we are also told that perfect health depends upon perfect circulation. So the circulation of that blood to all of the different parts of the body are very important. And indeed, we find that much of the dysfunction that happens in the body happens in response to problems with circulation. For example, let's take common examples. Let's say that we have a young lady or a medium-aged lady, and she's having lots of menstrual pain associated with her cycles. A lot of times that can be related to problems in circulation. And what are the problems in circulation? Well, there can either be too tight of clothing over the lower abdomen and the uterus that creates some impingement of blood flow in the area, plus also excess pressure, which can contribute to the pain. But also a major function associated with it is the fact that the legs are cool and the trunk is warm. And so there's abnormal circulation that's going on. And so the legs aren't covered well, but the trunk is covered well.
Yeah.
And so there's a disruption because in cold, the blood vessels constrict. And in warm, the blood vessels dilate. And so when you have a well-covered trunk, you have a lot of vasodilation that happens there. But if the legs are not well covered, then there's vasoconstriction. And so you're forcing the blood to the trunk and away from the extremities. And that can have a contribution to menstrual irregularities and menstrual pain and so on. And fixing that circulatory issue can be something that helps out with then the manifestation or the symptoms of the problem. Some individuals develop back pain, and they have disc disease. And with that disc disease, when you read enough MRI reports of individuals that have back pain, they've done an MRI. One of the early findings that you have of MRI findings of back pain is that an individual has desiccated discs. Somebody want to give me another word for desiccated? Do you know what desiccated means? Right. If you have a dehydrator, you will end up desiccating your food, right? If you go to the desert and stay there long enough, you will desiccate.
Oh. Dehydrate. Desiccate.
That's right. So dehydration, right? So desiccated discs are dehydrated discs. And so there is a dehydration that happens with the discs. And why is it that there's a dehydration? Well, there have been studies that have been done that show that the blood vessels that are going to the particular discs that have the problem, those blood vessels have blockages. And so you have cardiovascular disease manifesting in the small little arteries coming off of the aorta and going back to feed the discs between the vertebrae. And those that have poor circulation going to them, they end up turning dehydrated. And if you have a tire and you don't have it pumped up to the right pressure and you keep driving on it, well, the likelihood is that tire is going to pop. Right? Because its integrity is dependent upon it being nice and full and having that turgor of being nice and full. And so now, if it's not and it's dehydrated, now it's more squishy, it puts more pressure on the edges, and then you can have that environmental pressure because of the lack of blood flow that then you bend over, pick up something heavy, and now you have a half-flat disc, and it goes poof, and then the jelly on the inside pushes out and pushes on a nerve root and then you've got difficulties, right? Lots of pain, sciatica, and so on, and then you're crying and looking for relief, right? So circulation and circulatory issues can manifest itself in many different ways, and it's true that perfect health is dependent upon perfect circulation, right? Arthritis, degenerative arthritis, like osteoarthritis, the most common one. Well, the cartilage in your joints that protect the ends of the bones, the cartilage doesn't have any blood vessels inside of it, only along the surface of it, and so it's got to be able to get those nutrients through a very thick gel, you could call it, the cartilage. It's not, it's kind of like a gel, but very thick, and it's got to be able to get it through all of that. And so if you impede the blood flow in any way, and it's not able to get those nutrients drawn through that gel to the cells that keep it going, then that joint and the cartilage there starts wearing away. Not because of overuse, but because of undernutrition, because of circulatory issues. And so circulation is vitally important in order to get all of the raw materials that you need to all of the cells of the body so that they can continue doing their work and producing their products and so on. But if you have a factory that has workers, it's got machinery, it's got the structure, it has raw materials, you still can't do anything. Still can't do anything. Why? Because you're missing something. You're missing something vitally important. What are you missing? It's another resource from the outside. And I'm trying to remember if we covered this one yet. Maybe we didn't. So there's a law of thermodynamics, and that law says that all energy necessary for a system to function must come from outside that system. So all energy necessary for a system to function must come from outside of that system. So that means that nothing that is subject to that law, which everything that we know of is subject to that law except for one, that everything that is subject to that law, it cannot operate itself. It cannot cause itself to function. It does not have within itself all of the energy that it needs in order to begin its function, continue its function, and perpetuate it, and so on. It must get the energy from outside. That's all of creation. Everything in creation, if it's going to function and has a function, the energy for its function comes from outside of itself and must then come in, just like all of the things that you need from a physical standpoint must come from outside of yourself and be brought in. So it is true for the energy, that the energy is from the outside and it must be brought in. Now, let me ask you this: is the energy put into the thing, or is the energy brought into the thing? In other words, is the motive force for the computer, is it that you are pushing energy into the thing, or is it that when it's connected, the computer takes the energy that then is available?
Can it be both?
Can't be both. It's one or the other. All right, so the computer has to take the energy that's available. Right? Everything that is created, everything in all of creation must take, right, that which it needs. A seed that's planted in the ground, it must take of the water, it must take of the nutrients. There is an electrical reaction that happens at germination. It must take of that electricity. Yes?
But even that first motion of taking, it would have to be given something before. You see, that's why, because the computer of itself cannot take unless there was something first in it to start the action of taking.
Right. Can you, there has to be a point of origin.
Right.
Right? There has to be a point of origin.
Right.
And the point of origin is
Creation.
the point of origin is God.
Right.
Right? The point of origin is God. And so God in creating has put within the thing a certain capacity, a certain need, right? And characteristics or qualities by which that thing operates or functions.
Right.
So the origin is God. Now, within the context of the created thing, whether it is animate or inanimate, it must take.
Yes.
Right? It must take. And all of creation takes first. Not God, but all of creation takes first. And the energy that's necessary that it takes must come from outside of itself. And as long as the energy is available, it can take. If the energy is not available, it can't. If the energy remains away and it's a living system, then it will die. Right? It will die. And if it's not a living system, then it'll cease to function until it then has access to the energy again, and then it can take of the energy and continue its function. Yes?
So you're saying that the mitochondria You're saying that the mitochondria is not a power producing agency, it's a power processing agency. So it's actually processing, rearranging power instead of actually producing power. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Every energy system that we know of in the world and in the universe is not an energy production system. It's an energy conversion system, right? All we're doing is we're taking energy from one form and transferring it into another. You look at a hydrotherapy, hydrotherapy. Woo. Yeah, you can tell I work in a lifestyle center. You look at a hydroelectric plant, right? And we have some around here. You've got a dam on the river down there in Columbus. And what's the purpose of having a dam? It's not just to make a lake, right? The purpose of having a dam is so that you can use the power of gravity, and you can harness the power of gravity through the flow of water in order to turn turbines, and then that power of gravity through the flow of water is then converted to make electricity, which is then used to run all sorts of different functions and so on in houses and here and wherever, right? So it's only a conversion of the energy that's already there. There is nothing that humanity has and nothing that we know of, except for God, that actually produces the energy. It only transfers the energy that's there. So all energy necessary for a system to function must come from outside that system. And because that is true, again, all systems are dependent upon a source. And because all energy is that's necessary for a system to function must come from outside of it, therefore then we have cause and effect, which is a foundational law of nature. The foundational law of nature is the law of cause and effect, which is also seen in our relation to our dependence upon outside resources and of an outside power. And so cause and effect, we can understand cause and effect in that every effect must have a cause, and every cause must produce an effect, right? And let's see, the last time I did this with the guests in the Lifestyle Center, I had a few more points. And let's see if I can, because when I get new points, I take a picture of it. There we go. Okay. And it may take time for the effect to manifest. And so the cause is always first, the effect always comes after. And if the effect is present, the cause is present, because if the cause is removed, the effect will cease. So these are a few things, a few points that we can then understand from our laws of thermodynamics, its application with cause and effect. So every effect must have a cause, because there must be something outside that drives it, right? The driving of it, the causing it to function or dysfunction, comes not from inside of it, but from outside of it, right? And every cause must produce an effect. A cause cannot be there without producing an effect. It has to produce effect. And it may take time for the effect to manifest. Let's say that this type of cell is, let's do an easy one. Let's say that this type of cell is a beta islet cell in the pancreas. Anybody know what the beta islet cells do in the pancreas? All right, so they're producing insulin. And of course, we deal a lot with diabetes, and that's part of what we are educating for, is to help individuals with working on and reversing their diabetes. So the beta islet cells are responsible for producing insulin, and insulin, of course, is going to help you with decreasing your blood sugar levels through mechanisms that we're not going to talk about today. But let's say, for instance, that you have 1 billion beta islet cells. You got 1 billion beta islet cells. And you have a cause that then begins to destroy the beta islet cells. And it picks off 1, and then it picks off 2, and then it picks off 3, and then it picks off 4, and it picks off 5, and it picks off 6, and then all of these beta islet cells start dying bit by bit. How long is it going to take before you realize that there's a problem?
Depends on how like if it's picking off 1 a day, it depends on the time, how fast is the frequency of it picking off 1.
Right. So it is dependent upon the frequency, the rapidity, the rate at which it is killing off those cells.
Right.
So if you had a process that was in place that killed off all of the cells within 1 day, well, you would discover in that 1 day that there's a problem. But if it only picked off 1 at a time, and it did so, let's say, once every second, well, even at once every second, it will probably take years before you realize that anything is going on, because in biological systems, a lot of times we don't actually recognize that there's a problem until we've knocked off about half of our cellular function. Whatever that particular type of cell is and whatever function it has, usually about half of it gets knocked off before we end up actually manifesting to the point that you know that something is going on. And so we can have a cause that's in place for actually quite a while before the effect is discovered, before we know that it's there. But once the cause comes, it begins the process of producing an effect. And so the effect can be there for quite a while. So we might have somebody that has a disease, and the disease might have manifested in 2010. If the disease manifested in 2010, when could the cause not have come? Oh, look at, all right. The cause could not have come after the manifestation of the disease. And so anything that happens in their life after that time does not answer the question, what's the cause? Right? Anything that happens after the time of the manifestation of the disease does not answer the question, what's the cause for this disease? We have to look before, right? Because something has to be in place before the manifestation, because the cause always comes first. And the effect always comes after, and in biological systems, it usually takes a while before the effect manifests itself. Sometimes the process can be very traumatic and it may be very rapid, and so the time difference between the cause and effect can be quite short. But most of the time, it's a longer process, and so the cause might have been there a year or a few years before they actually manifest the problem. Which, again, remember, if you stick a peanut in your mouth and you have a food allergy right away, it's easy to draw a correlation between the two and go, oh, Well, that's the cause. But if you eat that food and you don't have a manifestation of the problem until 3 days later, well, you can continue in the process of eating that food and having manifestations and eating it and having manifestations and so on, and never draw the connection between the two, because the cause and the effect are delayed, right? The manifestation of the effect is delayed. And when we have disease that takes time to manifest after the cause is there, sometimes it gets very difficult to draw the connection between cause and effect, right? And so that means that we have to be smart about that as we look at cause and effect, and realize that nothing after the time that it develops answers the question. But what does help us after the disease develops is that if the disease is still present, that means the cause is still there, right? So if the disease is still present, the cause is still there, because if you remove the cause, the disease has to go away. Because the disease is not producing itself, it is being produced by the cause, right? Yes.
Is this in all cases though, or is it just specifically for disease? Because I'm looking that you can stop the cause, but still suffer the consequence to until a period of time. Say, for example, take a river, since you mentioned river before. The place is flooding, but wherever the river is coming from, it stopped. Doesn't mean that the water immediately stopped flooding. It takes some time, though the water was turned off up there, for the rest of the water to follow through. So, I'm asking, is it in all cases, or could it sometime be that the cause is fixed, but you actually suffer from the consequence of the cause because it still has a process of going through?
I will have to think about that one longer. But a preliminary response, which I also have to think about longer as well, I'll say it even though I might get myself into trouble, is if it takes a while for the thing between cause and effect to manifest, it might take a while for it to stop manifesting after you remove the cause. Right? But I've got to think about that more. I'm not absolutely sure about that one. It makes some logical sense, but I gotta. It's going to take longer than right now to think through that that response. So cause and effect is true not just for biological systems. It's true for non-biologic systems. Cause and effect is again a foundational law of all of creation. And so, since all energy is necessary for a system to function, and it must come from outside that system, then this system cannot function yet because it's missing the energy, right? So you've got to supply the energy. So not only do you need to supply the raw materials from outside, but you also have to supply the energy from outside as well. And what is the form of energy that the cells actually function by?
Electricity.
Right. There are chemicals involved in this electrical process, but it's actually an electrical system. You can get a small little voltmeter, very small, microscopically small, and you can put one end of the voltmeter inside the cell and the other end of the voltmeter outside of the cell, and in a resting state, the cell has a charge of around negative 70 to negative 90 millivolts. And how is that maintained? Well, you've got this membrane that separates the inside of the cell from the outside of the cell, and that membrane has capacities. It has proteins and channels and so on in the cell membrane that can selectively spit out certain chemicals and keep in other chemicals, or bring in certain ones and keep out other ones, right? And so it is a selectively permeable membrane, and since it can select and it can keep certain concentrations of chemicals on one side and the other, and those chemicals have a charge to them, either positively, negatively. Usually a neutral charge is one that just goes across the membrane. But positively and negatively charged particles, when you separate positively and negatively charged particles, there's a concentration gradient now that can, and the movement of those charged particles actually constitutes current, right? So when you open up these channels and you have concentration gradients, then it's going to go from high concentration to low concentration. The movement of those charged particles actually forms current, and so you have then an electrical current that is moving either inside or outside of the membrane. The membrane is resistant to that, and so there's resistance. That's part of electrical systems as well, and you can measure it in milliohms. You can measure or microohms, you can measure microvolts, you can measure the flow of current and so on with it. Cells really are electrical systems. Yes, they involve chemistry. You've got to have the chemicals that provide the charged particles, just like the electric wire requires electrons in order for that movement of the electrons to create that electricity in a cord. And so it really is an electrical system, and the function of the cell actually is not driven by the DNA and the nucleus. The function of the cell is driven by the membrane. And in fact, you have red blood cells, and red blood cells, they don't have a nucleus for about 3 months. They don't have a nucleus, but they continue to function. Now they have a very limited function, right? They're mostly just a storage molecule. They have a very limited function, and some of the main purpose of the DNA is to simply have the blueprints to produce to assemble the base products in order to produce particular proteins, enzymes, and so on. And so if you remove the DNA, then it's not able to produce those products from the base material. So it's not able to replace missing or damaged parts if you remove the nucleus, but it can still function with all of the parts that it has through the membrane. Right? And that's really the driving force of it. And we are told, and I'm going to, nope, hang on, I'm going to write this first. The electricity, where do the cells of our body get the electricity through? What system of the body?
Nervous.
All right, so it's through the nervous system, right? So it's through the nervous system. And then it's communicated to all of the cells of the body through which part of the nervous system? That's the wires, right? Through the nerves. How many cells of the body need the power?
All of them.
All of them. And not only is it power, it's also control. Right, all the cells of the body need to be controlled. They need to be controlled in their functions. And they need to be upregulated, downregulated. When you're digesting, it's going to divert blood flow. It's going to divert energy utilization and so on from certain areas of the body to the digestive tract so that you can accomplish that digestion well. And if you go for a hard run after you eat, well, now you're pulling resources away from the digestive tract that needs it to the muscles and other parts of the body. And now the digestion can't happen the way that it was supposed to because now you're diverting the blood flow to other areas, which is why it's not good to exercise vigorously after a meal and so on. So you've got to be able to control that. How many functions of the body are controlled through the nervous system?
All of them.
All of them. That's right, all of them. All of your homeostatic mechanism, every mechanism that the body has in order to assess what's going on and to respond to that assessment, to make changes in order to keep things in a normal function, it all happens through the nervous system to one degree or another, right? And of course, their nervous system utilizes the endocrine system and all the other systems in its function and so on, but it's through the nervous system that it's controlled. And how many cells of the body need to be controlled? All of them. So the pipes need to go to how many cells of the body to provide the nutrients and the raw materials? All right, so it needs to go everywhere, and so then the wires need to carry it to how many places? All the places as well. So in anatomy and physiology, you have this thing called the neurovascular bundle. So where you find blood vessels, you find nerves as well. And they're all running together. Why? Because everywhere it needs to be supplied with the raw materials, and everywhere needs to be supplied with the energy and the control. So we have some interesting quotes here. This comes from Counsels for the Church, page 209. The influence of the mind on the body, as well as of the body on the mind, should be emphasized. The electric power, what kind of power? The electric power of the brain, promoted by mental activity, vitalizes the whole system and is thus an invaluable aid in resisting disease. So the pathway for the system to be vitalized is through the nervous system, and it's an electrical function, right? It's an electrical function. And then we're also told in Special Testimonies on Education, page 33, the mind controls the whole man. Yet many spend all their lives without becoming intelligent in regard to the casket, the body, that contains this treasure. All the physical organs are the servants of the mind, and the nerves are the messengers that transmit its orders to every part of the body, guiding the motions of the living machinery. So, very important, interesting counsel, very good insight into human anatomy and physiology back from the 1890s, right? So, we have then the nervous system through electricity, through the function of the nerves and their communication to all the cells of the body in order to provide then the power and the control of the function for all the cells of the body. Now, every system that functions, it must get its energy from outside of that system, and that is also true of the nervous system. So where is your nervous system going to get the energy from?
Outside.
Outside. That's right. It has to get it from outside. Now, for every organ system and for every physical need that we have of raw materials, every particular need has a way of getting in, and it must be brought in from the outside. Right? We talked about that with the tree, the analogy of the tree. You've got a need, it must be brought in from the outside, and there's a behavior and action associated with it. You need oxygen, your respiratory system must bring it in by breathing. You need water and nutrients, your digestive system must bring it in by eating or drinking, right? You need sunlight, and so your integumentary system and your eyes need to bring it in by exposing or opening and so on, right? It must be brought in from the outside because the resources are outside of us, and it's also true for the energy, the electricity, the power. It must be brought in from the outside, but it must come in through an organ or an organ system. And I'm going to erase this because I need a little bit more space. And that is through the action of thinking. Right? That's through the action of thinking. Thinking is the action or the behavior that brings in the power that is necessary to produce the electricity in the nervous system in order for it to function. Now this is where some individuals who have been studying in neuroscience and so on get uncomfortable. Why? Because in neuroscience, the thought or the understanding is that it's the electrical activity and the physical structure of the brain that creates thought. Right? So the electrical activity within the correct structure of the brain produces thought. And of course, we know that different areas of the brain are accessed and the electrical activity coordinated through various different aspects in order to bring up a memory or to have a coherent thought and to bring together visual information, olfactory information, auditory information, and so on to bring together a coherent thought. And yes, you must have the physical structure because the physical structure is the storage space. It's the storage, it's the hard drive of information for that. But the storage space is not the software. Right? And the storage space can't do anything unless it has software to run it. Yes?
First of all, you said that all systems are powered by external forces.
Mm-hmm.
So that means, and everything in the body is controlled by the nervous system that's connected to the brain. So you're saying that diseases are also powered by the brain. Is that the natural conclusion?
Yes,
That's the natural. So all diseases are controlled and powered by the brain. That's one. And two, in your tree illustration, thinking was you said that an organ, everything that we get has to come in through organs.
Mm-hmm.
But thinking, you said in your first presentation, is actually an action, a love action.
That's right.
Right. So those two areas I'm a bit confused on.
Right.
Yeah.
So, thank you for that. And yes, it would be confusing if we had already finished our discussion and we were left here. Thinking, is that a capacity of the brain? No. Thinking is not a capacity of the brain. The brain has no capacity to think. Right? How much capacity does this podium have to think? Right? And how much capacity do your toenails have to think? Your kneecaps? Your heart, even? Right? No, there's a physical thing does not have a spiritual capacity. And you see, this is where we get so confused when it comes to science and neuroscience and other things like this, because scientists believe that the spiritual capacities of the individual are the result of the physical function. But that is not the case. Physical things do not have spiritual capacities. Only spiritual things have spiritual capacities. Right? How much does love weigh? What's its anatomic number? Can you measure it out? Can you look at it under a microscope? Can you weigh it? Can you get its density? Can you look at any of these things? No, because it has no physical properties. It is not physical. It is spiritual. Thought itself is not physical. It is spiritual. It's a spiritual capacity, and so we must have an organ or an organ system that itself is spiritual. Which is the Spirit. Genesis 2 and verse 7. God formed man out of the dust of the ground, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul. Right? Genesis 2:7. So God took dust, the body, he breathed into its nostrils the breath of life, the Spirit, and when the combination of the body and the Spirit came together, there was the living soul or the living being, right? And when we have, and it's hard to draw this in the way that it is, but anyways, so we have all of the rest of this is body, right? So we have the body, which includes our central nervous system, our peripheral nervous system, and all the different systems of the body, and all the physical functions that we can study and so on, right? That is all the body, but then we have the Spirit. And the Spirit is the organ or the organ system through which thought is brought to the body. But what happens to energy when it's brought into a different medium? When energy is brought to a different medium, the form of the energy changes. Right? When it's brought into a different medium, the form of energy changes. It might go from kinetic energy to electric energy, or from gravitational force now to, turbine, and it might turn into heat energy or other things like that, right? It doesn't cease to be energy, but it changes the form of energy that it's in. And so the form of energy that comes through the spirit to the nervous system is thought. It is thinking. And when that form of energy gets to the physical structure of the brain, it forms electricity. It transfers, and it becomes a different manifestation. It's now electricity, and that electricity we can measure with an EEG and so on. We can look at waveforms and so on. So science can look at the physical manifestation of that, but they assume that the physical manifestation then is the origin for the spiritual capacity, but it's not true. It's God, for in the beginning who? God, and God is spirit, right? Every physical thing came from spirit, from God. And we are created in the image of God. In the image of Him that He created them, male and female, He created them. It's not the physical that creates the spiritual, it's the spiritual that creates the physical. Right? And so in ourselves as well. So it is the spiritual capacity of thinking through the spirit that then generates the electricity in the nervous system that then is empowering the rest of the body and its function. Right? And thinking, what is the need again? We talked about the need before. I'm pulling out the red marker.
Love.
Right. The need is love, right? So there is a source of, or a pattern of thinking. Thinking is the action, just like breathing and so on, but there has to be the thing that's needed, and the thing that's needed is love. And so the thinking is there in order to bring in the love that one needs. And let's see, I don't have enough colors, but anyway, so we take the body and the spirit together, and that is the soul or the mind, right? That's the soul or the mind. So thinking is a function of the mind, but it's not a function of the brain. The brain does not have spiritual capacities. It's only the physical structure in which the thing must operate. And yes, just like a computer, if you damage the hard drive, you damage the function. And so you can put a bullet through the brain and it will change thinking because you have damaged the physical structure that operates there, but there's still the software of the spirit that is there. But if the software doesn't have the hardware to work with, what can it do? Right? So yes, you can derange thinking by messing up the physical structure of the brain or the chemical structure of the brain. You can add chemicals to it that messes up the thinking as well, right? Which really the thinking is the combination of the spirit and the body and is a function of the soul or the mind, right? And so we have this need for love that comes to us through thinking that then impacts the nervous system. When it does so, it generates electricity. That is carried down the nerves to all the different cells of the body in order to provide their power and also to control their function and to coordinate that function throughout all of the body. Okay. And I can't go deeper into that right now because we're already into our time, and so I need to pray, but we'll pick up here tomorrow and we'll begin with questions about this before we go on. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for your abundant blessings and your loving mercies. And Lord, again, as we explore how we're created and how we function, and that within the light or the context of your word, help us, Lord, to understand. And then not just to understand these physical things, but as we get deeper into the love and that need and the heart and its function, oh, Lord, bring your truth home to our hearts, that we may see and that we may know, that we may apply, and that we may be transformed. We pray in Jesus' name. Amen.